Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conference to go over the situation of COVID-19 in Quebec. Today, the Premier of Quebec, Mr. François Legault, is together with the Minister of Culture and Communications, Ms. Nathalie Roy, the Minister of Health and Social Services, Ms. Danielle McCann, and the National Director of Public Health of Quebec, Dr. Horatio Arruda. Mr. Premier. Hello, everyone. First, the mask that I am wearing today, it looks like a duck's beak, is a mask made by the company Mutt Jet Set from Normand Palton, made in Montreal and sold in many stores in Quebec. So I invite Quebecers to wear this mask or another, but if you're able to buy one made in Quebec it's even better. As you can see today, on top of Dr. Arruda and the Minister of Health, I have great visit, the Minister of Culture, who has great news to announce to us today. I also wish to salute in the room, I think I'm recognizing her, Sophie Préjean. No, keep your mask, it's okay. So the president of the Union des Artistes, Yannick Nerez-Séguin, our great orchestra conductor, and I've been told that Luc Fortin, the president of the Guild, is there as well, so musicians. So we'll get back to that today. Later. I wish to first say a word to Quebecers on what happened in the United States in the past few days, the tragic death of George Floyd. Of course, we were all touched. Those who saw the video, to see that police officer with his knee on the throat, on the neck of that poor man, George Floyd, who begs him to let him breathe. And on top, other police officers right there doing nothing. It's shocking. It's revolting. And I understand all people who were revolted, and I stand in solidarity with them. It shows that we still have work to do to fight against racism, and that is not the kind of society that we want to have in Quebec. So as the Premier of Quebec, I strongly denounce and ask everybody to continue, because we know that unfortunately this is something that still exists. We have to fight against racism. All human beings are equal or all the same, regardless of the color of their skin. So it's important to remember that. I know that there was a protest yesterday in Montreal. I know that at the request of Dr. Arruda, the vast majority respected the 2 meters and did it peacefully. Unfortunately, there were a few people who broke windows, damaged businesses, stole guitars. We saw that, and that is unacceptable. They created quite a ruckus. So that part, regardless whether we'd be shocked, I don't think that the cause gets helped by such gestures. I, of course, before talking about culture, I want to come back to the situation in our CHSLDs. So you will see tomorrow and over the next few days, we're going to open up people so that they can enroll. Since the beginning of the crisis, for many years, regardless of which political party was there, we're all a little guilty. Working in our CHSLDs with about 10,000 people missing. 10,000. They were compensated by people who were not necessarily trained, who did their very, very best, and I wish to thank them once again. But now we're going to be launching in mid-June this 3-month training program that is going to be paid $740 a week during the training period, and afterward people are going to start at $49,000 a year per year for those who will be working full-time. So I'm launching out a call. Tomorrow we are going to be giving you probably all of the addresses and the professional training centers where the training is going to be held. It's going to be held partly in professional training centers and also partly in CHSLDs. And I think that we owe it to our elderly to have an extra 10,000 trained people who are going to make the working conditions more pleasant for those who are already there and who will allow the orderlies to have a bit more time to be able to have exchanges with the residents. This is something that should have been done at least 10 years ago, maybe 20, but anyway, for all sorts of reasons, it's never been done. It was never considered a priority. compared to what is happening in our hospitals. So it is time that we correct the situation in CHSLDs. But for that, I need 10,000 people of all ages. So I repeat it. Please enroll 10,000 jobs to change, to improve the lives of those people who are vulnerable. I'd like to come back to the daily numbers. You've seen them already. Thank goodness the indicators are improving, so fewer cases, fewer hospitalizations, fewer deaths. That doesn't mean that the fight has been won. We have to continue wearing the mask. We have to continue respecting guidelines in order to be sure that we won't have to go back and to make sure that we don't clog up our hospitals. Because if we're talking about our orderlies and our nurses, they need, as we like to say, they need a break. They need a big break. We want to give it to them. We will be giving them at least 2 consecutive weeks of vacation in the summer, but for that, we can't have a new wave in the middle of the summer. So for that, keep wearing the mask and keeping the 2 meters. So the situation being better, that allows us to continue with the deconfinement measures. And today I am very happy. It's a particular pleasure of mine to be able to talk about culture. It is, and I often repeat it, culture is the soul of the Quebec people. Quebecers love their artists, and they miss their artists. Yes, we did see them in a few advertisements, and I wish to take this opportunity to thank those numerous artists who accepted transmitting the guidelines of Dr. Arruda, and I am sure that it helped to make sure that Quebecers adhere to the guidelines since the beginning. So I want to take advantage of this opportunity to thank the artists. And of course, the situation has been difficult. Just think about the showrooms, about the theater rooms. And of course, we are working very hard to reopen gradually with a certain number of spectators, but we're not there yet. But I am sure that our artists are capable of being creative in order to be able to continue soon in the following weeks, so that we can see our artists and so that the artists be able to work. So it is with a lot of pleasure that I'm announcing today a project, or different projects, a plan of $400 million in culture to tell you there's about $150 million, which is moving around a budget, but there's $250 million, which is entirely new monies. So that is money that is on top of the budget that had already been announced. And the budget already announced, let's remember, even if it seems like it was far away, it was right before the beginning of the crisis. We had announced a culture budget that was increasing by 12%, and now to that we're adding $250 million, a part that we started to spend for organizations, so $109 million, and the rest is going to be distributed according to bids. And Nathalie is going to explain it to us today. It's going to be managed a lot by the SODEC, but I've asked SODEC to do that more quickly than they normally do. So rather than taking a lot of time and analyze all those who have projects, well, it's time to put them forward. And if we put the $100 million aside for the festivals and theaters and all that, there's a good $300 million that is available for all sorts of recordings or captation. So that means television series like District 31, or television series, films, theater pieces that will be recorded, of course, because we can't have full rooms, concerts and dance projects, music projects. We know that we're good in music in Quebec, and writers, and we also wish, and Natalie will explain it to you, we also want to take advantage, because if there is a good aspect to this very bad crisis, is that we'll be looking more quickly at developing all sorts of digital platforms. So not just looking at our artists on television, but also on all sorts of platforms. So I'm very happy to be able to announce that plan of $400 million. And I don't know if I should say that, but I dare. If there's not enough, we'll have a look at it. But I want for projects, and I mean, I say it, you know, artists, all those who have projects, it's time to bring them forward. All sorts of projects. We really want to see you, and we want to put you back at work, and we want for Quebecers to see their artists. The daily thanks, just to end with. This is the week of people living with a disability. I see Sophie Préjean. We have Marilyn Picard, who has a child who is disabled, and we know that the crisis was even harder for people with a disability and for the parents of people with disabilities, because we're talking here about deconfinement of certain stores, of certain businesses, certain activities. But let's remember that there are people with disabilities who are confined all the time for their entire lives, and that is a sad reality. And we have to ask ourselves how we do it, and it's a question that we should all be asking ourselves, you know, business owners, all the activities, to give better access to those people with disabilities. There's also Lionel Carman and Jean-François Roberge who are working on all sorts of programs, you know, day camps, and for people with a disability, we're making exceptions as well, so that maybe the 2-meter standard won't be. Anyway, I have to be careful what I'm saying, because I'm going to be yelled at. But it's really important that there be activities for people who have a disability. And it's also important for the parents of children who have a disability, especially because some of them haven't gone to school for a good while. So we have to reopen classrooms for children with disabilities. We don't say it often enough either, but our CHSLDs, maybe 90% of them are elderly people, but there's a 10% that are people who have a disability. And as you know, we're not going to do this from one day to the next, but we are going to be replacing CHSLDs by elderly homes. But certain homes are going to be alternative homes for people with disabilities. So it's not always okay, in my opinion, to put people with disabilities together with the elderly. There are young people who need to also have around them other young people. So there will be alternative homes. Marguerite is already starting to make some announcements about that. So my daily thanks to all those children with disabilities, all the people with disabilities, all the parents of children with a disability. We're thinking about you, and we are trying to help you. To end with, I will repeat the 3 guidelines. Wear a mask. Even if it can be annoying, we have to get used to it a little bit. It's going to keep being a little annoying. But just think about the healthcare personnel. You know, I was saying early on that they need a break. If you don't feel like wearing a mask one day, tell yourself you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for others, to make sure that not too many people end up in our hospitals, and prevent our staff from taking a break this year and getting a vacation. And they really should be able to get vacation. And so keep the 2 meters away and wash your hands regularly. I count on you. Thank you for your support.
First, I want to say a few words about the tragic death of George Floyd in the United States. As Premier of Quebec, I stand in solidarity with the people who denounce racial violence. We must continue to build a society free of racism. I want to thank the vast majority of people who respected the distancing measures and who wore a mask at the protests in Montreal yesterday. On the other hand, those who took advantage of it to loot and vandalize must face the legal consequences. Today, we have good news for our cultural industry. In the last months, our artists have largely contributed to spread the public health message, and they've kept our spirits up. But it's not easy for them, especially for performing artists. That's why we're announcing financial support, and our minister will explain it in detail. We're going in the right direction. in our fight against the virus, but we must not let our guard down. If we don't want it to come back this summer, we all have a role to play. We must continue to keep our distances, wash our hands, and wear a mask. And if you're thinking about stopping your efforts, think about the health workers who need a break. I'm counting on you all. Thank you. Sur ce, je passe la parole à la ministre de la Culture.
And now the mic is to the Minister of Culture, Nathalie Roy. Thank you, Mr. Premier. So you'll guess that I'm very happy to be here this morning with, I hope, excellent news for the culture community, and I'm very proud to make this announcement together with our Premier. As well, I would like to emphasize and salute the presence of Ms. Sophie Préjean, the President of the Union des Artistes, Mr. Luc Fortin, the President of the Guilde des Musiciens Musiciennes, and Maestro Yannick Nazik-Séguin, the Director of the Metropolitan Orchestra. You must be looking forward to starting here again. So the announcement that we're going to make today, I hope, is going to give hope to artists and all culture, so that they start creating, and so that you be able to start working again as of now. So the pandemic stopped everything. Now we can talk about starting again. We're going to give artists and artisans powerful tools so that they do what they do best, and that is to create. Our historical budget last March, perhaps you'll recall, had as an objective to think outside of the box, to give creators the means that would meet the needs of the creativity. And the objective was also to encourage the emergence and the creation of innovating content. And that's why we're talking about new platforms, new computer or digital venues. Today, in the context of the pandemic, we realize that our vision is more pertinent than ever, since artists must adapt themselves to new realities and do things differently in order to be able to come into contact with the public. We have no choice. COVID requires this. But if there are people who have all the necessary creativity to get there and to be able to meet that new challenge head on, it is the artists. So to help them create and start working again, I'm announcing to you that our government is going to bring to close to $400 million its investment in the recovery of the cultural sector. Our plan, therefore, has the amounts dedicated to culture to an amount to more than $971 million, which is an increase of 26% compared to the 2019-2020 budget. So the big parts of our plan. $91.5 million will be invested in cinema production and television production to allow, amongst others, our producers to make films with more means and television series that will be able to be as good as their imagination. $71.9 million to help cultural companies and businesses that had to close their doors to the public during the pandemic. We invest $50.9 million to support the performing arts in the creation and broadcasting of innovative shows, thanks to calling to projects which are ready, Mr. Premier, to be able to continue their practice, respecting the new health measures with which they must now deal with. $33.5 million will go to the music industry and those artisans, so that they can also be able to tackle the challenges linked to the new habits of listening and the challenges linked to those health measures which are now imposed. And since our artists and writers often have very precarious statuses, our plan also has specific help for them of $6.5 million in order to better pay their works. A part of that $6.5 million will be dedicated to an emergency fund, and it will be managed by the Union des Artistes and the Guild of Musicians. As far as the festivals and events that had to be cancelled is concerned, we're going to increase the existing help by $5.9 million to encourage holding events online, programs 100% Quebecer, and ordering original orders that will premiere in this way. And of course, what was asked us, we will also publish budget and advertisement, $13 million to promote Quebec products. It's important. We want people to come back to theater halls. And at the end of March, and that, wasn't seen much, but we had given $59 million to credit advancement to organization of cultural organizations. So that means, museums, libraries, art schools, theaters, and many, there were 1,000, already have received 6 months of liquidities. And at the end of March, we had also launched a $59 million program in loans that is adapted to cultural enterprises, allowing them to have, a short-term operating fund. So I'm announcing to you that our recovery plan is adding another $59 million to that loan program from the SEDEC that has a lot of demand right now. A lot of cultural enterprises have asked for help, and it's helping them get through things. Our plan also has many other measures, programs, and call for projects which are very new. So please go on the site of the Ministry of Culture and Communication to get all details, but Mr. Premier, we're saying it, those are ready, these calls to projects. You are our biggest creators. Your creativity is recognized everywhere on the planet. So please go. The money is there to be able to pay you to create while waiting to be able to get back to normal. And since that might take some time, we put money there to help you get there. Now, and as I was saying, the plan has other measures, but please go look at the details because there's a lot. In terms of good news for the also deconfinement and culture, because we're still compartmentalized, so we're decompartmentalizing. So as of the 8th of June, it is the audiovisual production industry from pre-production to post-production that will be able to start again with its activities while taking into account the measures emitted by the public health authorities and by going along with the guidelines of the CNESST, which was specifically created for this sector. And I want to take advantage of this, Mr. Premier, to thank, at this stage, Ms. Préjean and Mr. Fortin. You are here, but I wish to thank you because those guides were elaborated by each sector together with the representatives of those sectors at the request of those artists who know better than anyone else what it means to work in those domains. So thank you for that collaboration. It went well. And you also relayed the information to your members very well. And that is what we're asking you to do. And so thank you. The information is being known. And now please go consult the guide to know how it's going to go with the filming of television and film. And the work is still being done with the authorities of public health as well as the CNESST for the reopening of other sectors that have been stopped. I'm thinking particularly the one of performing arts and broadcasting. So there's still work being done on that front. All of this will be announced further on, but I can tell you that we are confident. We're confident. I'm looking at Dr. Arruda, but we are confident that we'll be open to open broadcasting places before the national holiday. At least that's what I hope. Of course, that will be done with a restrained number of spectators. We understand that to be able to respect social distancing, and all of that will be done gradually. What will be the number of spectators that will be able to go into a performance hall? I don't know. Public health will be telling us all that. But all the details and the official date for the opening of the rooms will be the object of a different announcement in the upcoming days. So you'll understand that we're waiting for the green light from public health. Not everything has been finished yet, but it will be soon. To end with, the purpose of these recovery measures announced today, it's not complicated. It's to give the cultural environment powerful tools that will allow it to redeploy its creativity and use this impetus to be able to move us with what they create. And I want to take this opportunity, Mr. Premier, to thank the cultural environment and the artists, as well as the public, for their patience, their very great patience. The artists and artisans of the cultural environment who have been with us, entertaining us during this great confinement. Thank you for everything you've done, and we so look forward to seeing you in person. We're waiting, but we're looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you for everything, and have a good day. We will now start the question period.
Le nombre important de journalistes, on vous demanderait de vous limiter à une question par journaliste. On va commencer par Michel Jean de TVA Nouvelles.
Bonjour à vous quatre. Bonjour M. Legault, bonjour M. Arruda, Madame la Ministre. Monsieur Legault, une question pour vous.
Mr. Legault, question for you. Yesterday, there was a protest, thousands of people in the streets of Montreal. It went very well in the first part before people started creating a ruckus. But there were a lot of people who were in the streets of Montreal to denounce racism. But only about 10% of police officers at the SPVM come from cultural communities. And there was a study in 2019 that showed that people from Black communities, Arab communities, First Nations communities have 4 more chances of getting arrested. So visibly, we still have a problem. How do you think that we could fix this problem? And do you have the impression that we realize how important it is? Well, I think we have to look truth in the face. Yes, it's serious what we see in the United States. I don't think that our problem is as bad as that in the United States, but at the same time, we can't say that we don't have a problem. We do have problems with racial profiling, a lack of representatives in police corps who come from different communities, so we still have work to be done. And I think that what is happening right now reminds us, that we do have work to do and efforts. And of course, it has to come from police force, whether it be the SPVM or the SQ. But I still feel that there has been an improvement, but there's still work to be done. So we have to create awareness. We have to go case by case. We can't let things go. When something happens, it has to be denounced. We have to get to the end of each file.
Oui, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Monsieur Legault, Madame Roy.
Mr. Legault, Madame Roy was wondering whether the government was planning on helping showrooms, the symphonic halls, orchestras, dance, that could organize after the 24th of June shows in front of not empty rooms, but with a reduced number of spectators to respect the rules of physical dancing. Dr. Ruda, is the plan of reopening those rooms by the Minister of Culture to open them by the 24th? Does that make sense? Well, right now, since the beginning of the pandemic, we are doing absolutely everything, which rooms, where they are, what they look like, the consequences of the pandemic. Right now, we're working on different scenarios, and that plan is just a beginning. As Mr. Premier was saying, there will be adjustments to be done. And as far as the performance halls are concerned, we want to help because in as far as public health will allow to open at 50 or 60% of room, so that means that, we have to do something because that means that there's a lot of loss of income if it's only open at 50 or 60%. Well, I'm being called out. So first of all, I wish to thank all artists who involve themselves in the transmission of messages. You are models for our society. Art is part of life. Art is something that takes care of our souls. It cures our souls, whether it be music, dance, theater, humor. All of that is essential to our society. So I think that you are an essential service, but that had to go down or behind others for a question of survival. We need to get through it. I'm happy to see that the numbers are going well. So we are in a critical period in the Montreal region. We have to continue respecting the guidelines, but we're working very hard with all companies and have been since the beginning. And I would also say with the people who are artists to be able to reinvent a way of doing things that is still transitory, because COVID-19 is not going to disappear. Even if it's if things go better this summer, it could come back. So I think that we're doing everything so that, by the national holiday, things will be better. And we have challenges, and I think that we've been working respecting the principles of distancing and the good hygiene so that our artists don't fall ill either. I mean, it would be really sad to lose some of our artists, particularly those who are at risk. But yes, I think that we do have to reopen this element. It will allow us to resource ourselves, in my opinion, to be able to confront what could be coming a little bit later. I know I look like somebody who is, a harbinger of bad news, but we are going to be better prepared and we'll be able to take advantage of music and theater and dance. And I can tell you that I look forward that, I'd be able to go see the shows that I was subscribed to and that we, go as much as possible. So we're going to be working on it, but we have to, of course, make sure that things don't start up again, because if So please respect the guidelines.
Bonjour à vous tous. Ça fait exactement 3 semaines aujourd'hui que les écoles.
Exactly 3 weeks ago today, primary schools open outside of Montreal. Of course, many people had very great fears following that reopening. What is a portrait of the situation, Mr. Ruda? First, there was an increase of cases in young people, in teachers. And Mr. Premier, since it seems to be going very well, do you regret not having said yes to open the schools in Montreal until the end of June with what we know now? It has to be understood, first of all, the decisions that were made jointly between the Premier and ourselves. The Montreal situation, just to answer, was not at all the same as outside of Montreal. So we were truly, perhaps we could have opened a test, but the risk was much too great. And I would say that the acceptability from the public was not there either. Even peripherically, people were resisting. But right now, there's been, and I'm telling you, there will be cases, but there's been about 40 cases reported in the school setting. And I wish to say, either teachers who had been contaminated perhaps even before the reopening during the work, because those people, live in their communities, but parents, children, and the teachers consider that it is a success. It was an important level of effort because the measures for the opening were set up with distancing and all that, which requires a very important adaptation. But we are reevaluating everything to see, how the experience is going to be elsewhere, taking into account that the children are very often not very ill as such. Maybe the reopening at the fall will be a little different, but we're looking at every scenario. I think that in Montreal, taking into account the fragility and all of the elements, taking into account the density of the population, Montreal, it's a density of population that makes that interaction is more significant. I think it was a good decision. I think it was a good decision to open outside because it also reassures other parents to see that there wasn't a headcount. But I believe that the experience is very, very positive. And I'm not the one who's saying it. It's the people in that environment. First, it has to be understood that I had a lot of decisions that had to be made in the past 2.5 months, and it's never black or white. Very honestly, there were arguments to reopen Montreal in May, even if only for the well-being of the children. However, there was a risk that those children would transmit the virus to their parents or grandparents, and that we would be clogging up the hospitals of Quebec. So I just want to be very clear, because many things were said in the media over the weekend. I did not have the green light from public health authorities to reopen the schools in the Greater Montreal area and Joliette in May. That's very clear. Now, the question of June. Okay, we can ask that question. The decision that we made was to reopen the daycare centers. These are risks that are similar to those in schools, because daycare centers don't end on the 20th of June. If school were not to end on the 20th of June, we probably would have looked, as of today, to reopen the schools at about the same time as the daycare centers. But it's really always pretty easy, on Monday morning to look at the game on Sunday night and said, oh, this player should have done that and that instead of this. But in May, I did not have the green light from public health. I would have had to have gone against the recommendation of the public health authorities. I didn't exclude it, but I decided to follow the recommendations of the public health authorities in May. And in June, honestly, reopening schools for a couple of weeks, I don't think that it's a good idea. We know that for many artists, the CERB is going to end at the beginning of July. So what they're asking is, will there be an emergency fund for the contracts that were canceled? So for artists who were supposed to work in the spring and who probably would have worked this summer. So for those canceled contracts, as well as for broadcasters, is there going to be a compensation for the loss in ticket sales following the cancellation of shows? To answer more specifically, there's an emergency fund that has been set up that will be managed by the UDA and the Guild, but it will be for extreme situations. What we wanted to do with that recovery plan is to get artists back to work and to give them the opportunity of creating and to pay them to do so, and to also give them the opportunity of creating and using every possible and imaginable means to be able to get to the public. So we're working differently. We call that, outside of the box. We allow them to really explore and create, and that is why I was saying, these call to projects are there, and go, because that will be your payment. And, the grants will be open, and there's a great opening to have artists work.
Bonjour, Catherine Beauchamp, 98.5. En complément avec ma collègue Lépine Blondeau.
To go along with the previous question, I would like to know there are artists who will not be working with these call to projects. There's a culture of saying, in Quebec there's a lot of actors, very popular artists who are going to be working, and others are not going to be working as much. What are we going to do with those artists who will not be working? Well, that is similar to the fact that the emergency fund that was set up is really for extreme cases, people who may not be able to work. And please know that these calls to projects brought forward, there's a lot to do for creation. So before, getting to the finalized project, there's a creation development project, and there is money for that as well. So we understand that artists won't be able to be on stage tomorrow morning, perhaps won't have a television series tomorrow morning. But if the artist has something to offer, has something to create and deploy, well, they could go to that call for projects. So that is a way that we found to pay them, is to create. But will individuals be able to be equal to like a production company or an organization that is already established? For example, is the SADC going to make the difference between the two? There's not just the SADC, there's the CALC and the Ministry of Culture. There are calls for projects in all three organizations that are, within the Ministry of Culture. And the order has been sent with the Crown corporations to have as many people work as possible. We are ordering things. We want our artists to do what they do best, which is to create. So we truly have opened very broadly to offer work, knowing very well that everything is not going to be starting at, full blast tomorrow morning. I would like to know whether the contracts with the artists who had, contracts that were signed with the Union des Artistes, the UDA, whether their contracts was honored as promised in mid-March, as was announced first. And I would also like to know whether the show promoters who had committed themselves to have artists come here and who often paid quite a bit will have the right to have, a compensation of some sort. As far as the concerts is concerned, know that in the month of March last, as I was saying it, the government sent $109 million to different organizations and associations, artists, groupings, to help them. These were commitments from the government. So these continue. As far as the contracts that were given by, such and such a producer to such and such an artist is concerned, the government cannot force that producer to pay the artist, except that if they did get the money, of course they have to do it. The money has to make its way down to the artist if they have the money to do so. And you were talking to me about the producers that would bring... Yes, for festivals. Okay, well, if you're talking to me about the festivals, for example, as far as the amounts that were already paid, in principle, this is what we said, in principle, they had to be reimbursed. Like for shows at the Bell Center, well, the amounts that have already been spent have to be given, paid.
Bonjour à vous quatre. Juste avant de poser ma question, j'aimerais
Before asking my question, I'd like to know whether Mr. Préjean, Mr. Séguin, Mr. Fortin could come and talk to us when you will have left to come and so that we can keep the social distancing rather than having a scrum with a journalist. It would be really appreciated. Thank you. My question is for you, Ms. McCann. In the giving of the premiums of people who work in hot zones, these payments, these installments, are associated to groupings of jobs, so those who are named in the decree that you signed. I have been receiving a lot of testimonies of people working right there, social workers, specialized educators, physiotherapists, orthophonists, all those people who are mobilized to work in hot zones, but who don't have the right to that premium because they're not named in the decree. So my question, was that something that was voluntary? And if not, can you change it? Thank you for your question. You're giving me the opportunity, first of all, to be happy as well for the announcement made for culture, because culture is very good for our health, whether it be physical or mental. And also to tell you, if you allow me, that the mask that I'm wearing today is a mask to honor nurses of Quebec. That is made by Poche et Fils, which is a Montreal-based company. To your question, sir, of course, the spirit of the decree that you were talking about was really to give a premium to those people who have close contacts with those people. It's not limited, therefore, to the job title. Yes, but what I'm adding right now is that we continue having discussions with the unions who represent the workers, and we have always made the necessary adjustments. If, for example, we did not see a situation coming if it was required, of course, we continue our exchanges with the unions in question, but the spirit of that decree is linked to the task, not the job title. The placement agencies in CHSLDs, many testimonies were given of people recruited by these placement agencies who said that they were sent sometimes in many CHSLDs without really getting any training at all. In light of everything that happened, isn't it time to review the role of placement agencies in the health network? Well, thank you once again for your question as well, because we have a ministerial decree that was thought really to go along those lines, and which has been in effect for many days or weeks. And that ministerial decree, first and foremost, says that there's an obligation on the part of agencies to make it that their workers don't go from one establishment to another. So these dedicated teams that we're talking about, so agency workers must go to the same establishment and even in the same zone, a hot zone or a cold zone. So it's the same thing for all workers. So avoid that mobility that was extremely problematic. So the decree is formal on that. And for all workers, including workers from agencies, we are going to be giving training in prevention of infections. We also, and also the PPE. So that people from those agencies are trained like any other healthcare workers.
Bonjour à vous tous. Ma question s'adresse à Monsieur Legault.
My question is for Mr. Legault. You mentioned the work of the police officers in the present context in the United States, for example. A few months ago, you started at the government of Quebec a thought process on a green book about the confidence level in Quebec towards police officers. To what extent is racial profiling part of that green book? And the situation of the past few days and weeks, will they modify how you see that thought process? Well, it is in fact part of that thought process that Geneviève Guilbeault is having, the Ministry for Public Safety. So in that green book, we will be looking at, and right now we're looking at the role of police officers and how to make sure that there is no racial profiling, and there is, unfortunately, still some in Quebec. It's not a majority, the vast majority of police officers don't do that, but there is attention to be paid to this aspect, and it will be in the Green Book. English? I would like to know, we know that there's 1,500 soldiers in CHSLDs in 25 centers. We'd like to know if ever the soldiers are removed in the following weeks, is there an immediate plan? Okay, first, to give you the exact numbers, that right now there are 780 military staff in CHSLDs, and there's 350 military personnel who give support to those 780, and they are outside of the CHSLDs. I had the opportunity to say before that I would like for the ratio to be modified somewhat, that there'd be more people in CHSLDs and fewer outside of CHSLDs. So if we calculate, that's 1,130 military staff. I trust that Mr. Trudeau and the federal government are going to leave these 1,130 people until the 15th of September. Hello. My question is for Ms. Roy. If I've understood correctly your announcement, the purpose is to stimulate, to give work and create. But does that take into account the fact that producing is going to be more expensive because of the measures of social distancing? Will there be more means to do the same thing? Well, your question is very pertinent. All the groups that I've met, the hundreds of groups, well, I didn't meet them. Everything was over the phone in the past few weeks, but the hundreds of groups with whom we spoke, we're saying the same thing because, of course, we have to see that producing anything at all, applying the new measures of distancing, has costs because there is equipment to be bought, but also because it's more time, and time is money. And we did take into consideration the amount, when I said that there were cultural projects, that there were grants that were increased, there were amounts that were increased for projects. Of course, it takes into consideration the fact that projects will be more expensive. So yes, we did take that into consideration, what this new reality is, which is that of living with COVID and how we can continue to create arts and culture with COVID present.
Yes, Mr. Premier,
English.
Going back to yesterday's protests, one of the main messages from the protesters was that systemic racism is not just a U.S. problem, that there is systemic racism with Montreal Police and the SQ. Do you agree with those protesters?
Yeah. I would say that, yes, we have to admit that we have some problems in Montreal, in Quebec, but the problem is not as worse as in the United States, I would say. But still, I don't like to see that few, it's a real, very, very small minority of our police people that they choose a bit the people arrested. So I would like that we stop that, and I want to make sure that in the study that is done and the book that will be presented, the Green Book by Geneviève Guilbeault, this problem will be studied in order that we make sure that it doesn't happen anymore.
Giuseppe Valiente, Canadian Press.
Good afternoon. I'm going to retake the question of my colleague from CBC, and I'll just go a little more detail here. Justin Trudeau, just a few moments ago, earlier today, he said, regarding the protests in the U.S., but in Canada as well, he said, anti-Black racism is real, unconscious bias is real, systemic discrimination is real, and they happen in Canada. So do you still think that Trudeau is wrong and that the protesters yesterday are wrong and that there is no systemic discrimination and systemic racism in Quebec?
Well, we had this discussion very often. I think that there is some discrimination in Quebec, but there's no systemic discrimination. There's no system in Quebec of discrimination, and it's a very, very small minority of the people that are doing some discrimination.
Next question.
Matthew Lapierre, Montreal Gazette. Dr. Arruda, when you look at a protest like went on yesterday in Montreal, do you have any concerns about the virus spreading in that environment? Are masks enough when there's a crowd that large?
Okay, I was not there, but I've seen some pictures, and also I've seen some, I would say, helicopter type of, and most people were wearing masks. I think most people were in distanciation. We must understand that the 2 meters is what is more important. It's clear that any people who get together, and more there is people, more there is a risk of people who are asymptomatic to transmit the disease. But I would say that we will see what's going to happen in those persons in the next days. I'm worried. I'm not in panic, if I can say, because what I understood is that most people were respecting the 2 meters and they had masks. So in fact, I hope they have washed their hands when they come back home for not getting the disease from different objects. But there is probably sometimes where they don't, we're at 2 meters. But if it's a short time, it's less dangerous. But I would say, I will not recommend any gathering more than what we said. Will not recommend it, but I can understand that because of the crisis and because of the message of this manifestation against that, I would say racism, I understand why. As they were there, I hope that we will see if there is going to be cases, and if the only exposition they could have was the manifestation, we will have, I would say, objective data.
Next question.
Amanda Klein from CTV. Good afternoon. I have a few questions for my colleagues. The first one, some say justice should be carried out in an open and public manner. So is it a problem that the public will be shut out from attending court cases?
I don't think so. I think that what Sonia Lebel announced last week is that it depends on the matter. If it's a criminal matter, I think we'll continue to have a normal court process. But if it's a minor offense, yes, we'll go more and more by video.
And second, first on shopping centers, is there a date for the Montreal area? And just a quick follow-up to that, many businesses have had to purchase additional equipment, personal protective equipment, without having revenue for the past 2 months. So is there a plan to compensate businesses or to help them in any way?
I think that Pierre Fitzgibbon is looking for a plan for the retail business. There's already a federal plan where they can loan $40,000, and if they reimburse $30,000, they can keep $10,000. So I think that what we're trying to make sure is that between the federal and the provincial levels that we find ways to help them.
And so there's
regarding the date of opening,
there is scenarios. We don't do any announce before the Prime Minister can say that, or the Minister who's going the Premier or the Minister who is going on the sector.
We'll take the next question.
Good afternoon, Gloria Enriquez with Global News. My first question is for Madame Roy. How are you going to help consumers get their money back for concerts and other cultural events that have been cancelled?
We are still looking at that. It's not in the plan right now, but everything is taken consideration.
Okay, so there's a possibility that we might see some action on that.
Well, legally speaking, they have a right to be refunded if there is no show. But the thing is that we don't know if all the shows are going to be replaced or simply postponed or cancelled. Yes. So, but we are looking at that, but it's not in the plan right now.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. We'll take a very last one. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. The government has permitted day camps to reopen, but many municipalities have decided not to open their day camps. So do you have any idea of what parents are going to do?
Yeah. André Laforêt, Minister of Municipal Affairs, she's working on financial help for municipalities, and we would like that as many camps as possible open this summer. And we understand that there are additional costs because the number of people per group has been reduced, so you need to hire more people. So André Laforêt is talking with the UMQ and the FQM responsible to represent the municipalities in order to find ways to help them financially, but for me it's a real priority that those camps be open.
Thank you. Merci. Oui. Je demanderai à nos 3 invités de venir sur scène aussi. Merci.
Bon.
Thank you very much.
Non, mais je voulais juste parler 5 minutes.
Comme ça, là, on peut...
Bonjour,
ça va bien, ça va bien?